as it's something that's very much in line in terms of what we're trying to do on localization and understand in terms of what more we can be doing across our agencies. So in terms of the format for today's discussion, so I'll hand over in a few moments to Anne Street, who is Head of Humanitarian Policy at CAFOD, who led the piece of research, which was written by Andy Featherstone to talk more about the research piece itself. And then we'll hand over to Jing Pura, who is the platform coordinator for the Transforming Surge Capacity project in the Philippines, to talk about the research from her perspective and some of the kind of follow-on which has happened in the Philippines since this report was finalized. And then the idea is that we then have an opportunity for dialogue with the group, so chance for questions and discussions on what we've heard. So without further ado, I won't take up too much time. I will be handing over to Anne Street in a moment, who I believe is going to share her screen with us, and we'll start with a presentation on the research report. Okay. Anne, are you with us?
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes. Good morning. How are you?
Brilliant. Okay, I'll start straight away, and thanks so much, Kat, and welcome to everybody. I know there's people joining from a number of different countries, so that's really great. So I wanted to, as Kat said, talk to you about the research that was undertaken last year in September, October, November, and was finalised into this report, Time to Move On. So the next screen, please, Tim. Okay, so in terms of what we were looking at, we wanted to support international actors to identify surge recruitment practices and alternative approaches, very much to support national capacity. So looking at it from that angle, and explore how we could support improvements in effectiveness and efficiency of surge across the sector. So the research was undertaken by 4 of the agencies that are part of the Transforming Surge Capacity project, but who have also signed up to the Charter for Change, which is an initiative signed by 29 international NGOs to change the way that we work with and relate to national actors. So one of the 8 commitments in the Charter for Change speaks right into this research. And just to briefly say what that commitment is. So the commitment is broadly framed under stop undermining local capacity. So we, as agencies, have committed to identify and implement fair compensation for local organisations for the loss of staff if and when the signatories contract local organisation staff during the first 6 months of a humanitarian crisis or in a protracted situation. So this research also wanted to look at what the impact of that was on national actors, and to explore options and alternatives. So next slide, please. Yeah, thanks. So that's so just to say very briefly on the methodology. It included a literature review, a focus on the Philippines, and an in-depth 2-week research in the Philippines, interviewing international and national NGOs, and then looked more broadly at a number of other contexts, including Pakistan and South Sudan, and also undertook interviews with senior NGO leaders in 5 different countries. We also undertook a small survey. So next slide, please. Going on to the research findings. So I'll just give you a couple of minutes to look at this and take it in. So basically, what we did was we asked organisations for how much this problem affected them, national NGOs, how much the loss of staff affected them in 3 periods of humanitarian response. So the initial 6 months, then the 6 to 12 months of rehabilitation, and then finally the reconstruction. And the blue and the yellow bars are really the most pertinent, because the blue is we always lose staff, and the yellow is we always lose at least 1 staff. So blue is several staff, yellow is at least 1. And so you can see from that actually overall more agencies are affected by losing staff in the rehabilitation phase rather than the initial response, when many organisations surge in their own staff, and then once the rehabilitation funding comes in and they're looking to develop the programmes, that's when they look for national trained capacity and start to recruit from partner organisations. So if we can go on to the next slide, please. This talks a little bit to what the findings were in terms of the impact on national organisations. So it's mostly at the level of managerial and technical staff who have good humanitarian skills and also tend to be more visible. So they, for example, attend cluster meetings or other coordination mechanisms where they become known more than, say, other staff who are doing other work. I spoke to the issue of where this hits most in the previous slide, and then beyond that impact of the actual losing of staff, a lot of the NGOs that we spoke with talked also to the way that staff were recruited. So some real concerns about unethical recruitment practices. So staff being pressurized once they were offered a job to leave very quickly, not to work out their notice periods, and very often no references were taken up and things like this, which obviously cause some considerable difficulty to national organisations. So next slide, please. So in order to address this problem, it's also important to understand why people move. So what are the pull factors and the push factors around people deciding to leave their organisation and go and work for an INGO? And I guess it's not surprising really when you look at this. So the very much agree is the blue, and the biggest bar in blue is a higher salary, followed by improved benefits and the perceived potential for career progression. However, I have to say that some of these things we weren't able to to follow up. So, for example, career progression, whether that actually happened, whether at the end of the reconstruction rehabilitation phase, whether those people who left national NGOs to go into international NGOs actually were able to progress, or whether with the cutbacks, once the funding dried up, they lost their jobs. So the research didn't look at some of those sort of more in-depth issues and follow-up. But I think that it it raises some interesting absolutely challenges and issues around how we address this. Interestingly, that actually the issue of better opportunities to benefit from training was not as high as perhaps international NGOs might have originally thought. So, I think that last bar indicates that perhaps people in national NGOs do feel that they have a level of training and support. Okay, next slide. So, looking a little bit wider, we wanted to look at what are the alternatives, and what can international NGOs do working together with national actors to address some of these issues. So this slide lists a number of strategies which we tested out and asked our interlocutors, and also from desk research, what their opinions on it were. So obviously the capacity building issue is key, and this was the option that most national NGOs that we spoke to preferred, that actually they had more support for their own staff and their own organisational strengthening. And there is a lot of work being done on that. And one example that came up in the course of the Philippines research was the carrot work, and Jing perhaps might pick up on that later in the session. So secondly, the collaborative working to develop surge capacity, and that's ongoing through the TSCP work and the development of surge rosters. Another aspect, another strategy that seemed to be something that has potential but isn't yet very widely used, is for INGOs to actually have prior agreements in place through their partnership agreements with national NGOs, and I'll come on to that later in this presentation. And another aspect is seconding international staff into international NGOs. And although this doesn't necessarily address the issue of staff movement, it does support the capacity of the response at the time. And there've been some interesting recent examples during the Nepal earthquake and Typhoon Winston in Fiji. And then the last aspect that we sounded out people on was the issue of financial compensation, because that's given as one example in the Charter for Change. And pretty much, actually, interestingly, people felt that was not really the national NGOs that we spoke to didn't feel that this was really a way to address the issue. I mean, it could be useful for them, obviously, as a form of compensation, but they didn't really feel that it got to the nub of the issue. So next slide, please. So in terms of the conclusions that we drew, as I'm sure all of you on this webinar will know, that the localization and the support for national actors was a very strong outcome of the World Humanitarian Summit last year, and many people, many organizations made commitments to strengthen collaboration, and on the part of donors and some large INGOs, that was solidified into the grand bargain, and a very strong commitment in their work stream to provide more support for local and national responders. And that's also complemented through the initiatives undertaken by the Charter for Change signatories. However, there's still a lot more to do, and so I think taking forward this research and the recommendations, it will actually be part of that response. So next slide, please. So we made a series of recommendations blocked around 3 categories. So some recommendations to national actors, some to ourselves as INGOs, and then some wider into the system. So before I finish, I'll just run you through those. So it seems important to support national NGOs in their continued efforts to strengthen their human resources management systems and policies. So providing a better work environment and, as far as possible, job security, benefits, etc., for staff, so that people feel less keen to look for other jobs in other organisations. This research was interesting and exciting, but there are still real gaps in our evidence, and we didn't. I think it would be fair to say this research is perhaps only a snapshot. And it would be great if national NGOs actually, through their national consortiums, document reasons for staff departure during exit interviews, so that we have a greater understanding and are better able to address both the push and the pull factors. And then finally, in the context of all the commitments of the World Humanitarian Summit, there's actually quite a lot that national NGOs can do to hold their partners, the INGOs and the UN agencies that they work with, to hold them to account for their actions and their lack of actions. And I mean, there's frameworks like the Principles of Partnership, which were agreed and signed back in 2007 across the humanitarian sector, with many international NGOs and UN agencies signing up to them. And in our own sphere, the Charter for Change. And I think NGOs can use those those things to dialogue with their international partners. Next slide, please. So in terms of recommendations to international actors, we consider that it is important actually to address this issue of the poaching of staff. So look at how you can put that into your strategic and your implementing partnerships, so that this is articulated and discussed and written into contracts, and that INGOs can actually, look at how much this affects them, how much they are actually recruiting national NGO staff during emergencies, and draw up ethical recruitment codes, and make sure that those codes that are drawn up, or policies, actually sort of filter down to regional and national HR staff, so that people actually know what the organisational policies are. And then we consider, obviously, it's important for INGOs and UN to support their partners in developing their own response capacities. But obviously that's part of a much deeper engagement. And then finally, to invest in and support local NGO organisational capacity that permits a shift to a partner-led response. Again, part of a broader issue. And then finally, next slide, please. Just a couple of recommendations into the system, and then I'll leave it there and pass over to Jing. So very clear, and I think speaks right into the Transforming Surge Capacity project, that the humanitarian system really needs to look at how it supports and strengthens national surge. And so the work that's going on in Philippines with the Philippines roster is important, and it'll be useful to document and learn those lessons and see how they will be applicable and picked up in other contexts. And then finally, this issue of the gap between the commitments that are made and the practice on the ground, and really encouraging all our own organisations as international actors to live up to the commitments that we made at WHS last year, and to work with our national partners. So I'll leave it at that and hand over to Jing. Thank you very much, and we can discuss it and take questions in the discussion. Thanks.
Should I go already? This is Jing.
Yes, please, Jing.
Okay, thanks, Kat. Hello, everyone. My name is Jing Pura, and I coordinate the Transforming Surge Capacity project in the Philippines with Christian Aid as lead agency here. So I asked Tim to put out the slide on supportive models of surge, because this is where I will be building on from Anne's presentation, particularly the first two models, which is capacity building of NGOs to lead humanitarian response and working collaboratively to develop surge capacity. First, because these are the most preferred by CSOs here in the Philippines, both national and international. Second, because we think that this would address the underlying causes of migration or movement of local staff to international NGOs and UN. And thirdly, because this is where we have also focused our energies and abilities within the Transforming Search Capacity project. Let's look at the capacity building of NGOs to lead humanitarian response. And the examples that were put here are the Humanitarian Response Consortium and the CARAT. These are efforts of two INGOs, Oxfam and Christian Aid, to develop a more partner-led humanitarian response. So this has been an ongoing work in the Philippines, 5 years or so in the making, and this is still being improved. But at the moment, we are seeing the fruits of that strategic choice. These NGOs are now leading emergency response and even leading humanitarian coordination in emergencies. So we continue to support this advocacy to develop institutional capacity and to develop partnerships between INGOs and national NGOs for locally led emergency response. The second is working collaboratively to develop surge capacity, and this is where the Transforming Surge Capacity project invested a lot. In the Philippines, we established 2 surge platforms that interrelate. One is called On Call Surge Philippines, which is a community of humanitarian actors with membership of 30 organizations, 13 of which are international, 13 are national, 2 are professional associations of doctors and engineers, and 2 private consulting firms focused on WASH and shelter. Altogether, the 30 organizations have contributed and vetted 412 individual humanitarian responders to a joint roster or a collaborative roster. So On-Call Search Philippines is aided by a web-based platform for this database to be activated during emergencies. It is governed by a 9-member steering committee coming from the 30 organizations. It is quite similar to a dating app, if you're familiar with it, or Airbnb or Uber, where HR and emergency managers can access roster members to be deployed. We are aiming for this to be a robust roster, targeting to build up to 1,000 individual roster members and still increasing the community so that when emergencies come, we don't scramble. It's not so chaotic as we experienced during the Haiyan response. The other platform that we supported is the Philippine Partnership for Emergency Response and Resilience, which is composed of 4 big networks of national NGOs in the Philippines with an estimated membership of 2,000 local NGOs. These 4 networks have agreed on 3 key things: coordination protocols, localizing humanitarian coordination to subnational levels, and local resource mobilization to develop a pooled funding that can be accessed by local CSOs for quick response. And fortunately, we are supported by the Disasters and Emergencies Committee in the UK through the sharing of their experiences and tools for this local humanitarian fund initiative. So the time to move on research is actually calling for, stop undermining local capacity and instead strengthen local capacity. And it's best to understand what has been there in the first place before any emergency response is initiated by international or UN agencies. So the Transforming Search Capacity project is calling for localization, which is, we say, a loaded concept with little practice so far and interpreted in various ways by different actors depending on where they sit. So this is what we grappled with within this Transforming Search Capacity project, and we are looking at what does localized search look like. And after 2 years, we're seeing these 2 models that we have supported, the capacity building of NGOs to the humanitarian response and working collaboratively to develop search capacity. I prepared a set of slides, but I've decided not to discuss those anymore, and because those are propositions on localizing surge still, and there might be other venues to discuss that probably for the discussion of the future of surge. But the slides would contain, how do we define surge capacity? What does a localization approach mean? What is our working definition of localized surge? And what are the actions that we can do? So those are, I hope that gave you a practical handles on how we are doing this in the Philippines. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jing, for that presentation, and also to Anne for your time as well. So I think if people are ready and interested, the idea was that we did now kind of use the remainder of the time that we have on this call for a dialogue with those online. So the idea is maybe we were going to try and get a couple of reflections or questions from the group. I think we've already had one from Angela, but if anybody else would like to share a reflection or to raise a question, if you just pop a mention in the messenger bar, and I think Tim, who's helping to moderate the session, will unmute you so that you can share the reflection. So I'll just give people just a few moments to ask any questions or to raise that they would like to ask a question or share a reflection on the messenger. And hopefully everybody knows the messenger bar. Sorry, it's the chat function at the bottom, I should have said. So you just, you click on it and you can write questions or flag if you do want to ask any questions.
Hi, Catherine. I have a question.
Hi, yes, who's this?
This is Inge from Cordate.
Hi.
Thanks for the two very clear presentations. I had a question about the Philippine situation as an example. What is a little bit worrying me is that there are many local organizations that have limited capacity as such. And what I see is that when there is a major disaster, donors tend to look for organizations that can have large-scale response. So how, in a Philippine situation, is the roster also connected to enabling a larger scale, let's say, local response that donors can fund? Because I think that's, you understand what I mean? That's one of the issues also that came out formally out of research in the Philippines, that many of the local organizations have this limited response capacity. And how do we deal with that?
Okay, thanks very much, Inga. I think we've also had a question from Iftika, who's based in Pakistan with ActionAid as well, on the messenger bar. Anne and Jing, can I suggest that we take those first three questions first? So just to recap, I'll just read out for those of you who haven't seen it. So there was a first question from Angela Roos. Let me see if I can bring it up. In fact, my computer's just done something a bit funny. Tim, would you mind just reading out the question? Oh no, hang on, my computer has unfrozen. Okay, so Angela Roos's question to Anne Jing is, in practical terms, how would a national NGO hold an INGO UN agency to account, e.g. pulling staff? Wouldn't we also need to address how national NGOs are represented in NGO forums, which are generally internationals only? Also, how do you set up an ethical code to not poach staff when on an individual level, some working for an NGO may be well qualified for an INGO job and would want to move to an INGO as part of their career development? As an individual, wouldn't it be unethical to stop somebody working for a national NGO to apply for an INGO or UN job? So we have that question from Angela, we have Inga's question, and then from Iftika, we have the following reflection. So I think we're not talking about the real reasons behind the issue. The core question is why local NGOs are unable to offer the matching salary and career progression. INGOs and donors design projects in a way that keeps a small share of resources for HR. So without resources, how can local NGOs attract and keep staff? So can I suggest we start with those three questions or reflections, and if we start with Angela's. So Anne or Jing, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, shall I start on some of Angela's very good questions, and thank you so much for that. I mean, firstly, I want to say very clearly that the whole research and looking at this issue, we are not saying, and absolutely would never say, national staff working for a national NGO shouldn't progress their careers and this shouldn't happen. Absolutely, that it's people have a right to move, people should move, people should, do what's best for themselves and for their families, looking for better opportunities, whether that's in terms of experience or salaries or opportunities. So, I think that we need to be really clear about that. And that was why in the research we both had, we employed two consultants, one of whom was a very good social science researcher, but the other was is a human resources specialist. So he was able to come in to marry up the findings of the research in terms of looking at it in terms of what are the implications and what should human resource management do to address this issue. So I think that's an important first step. In terms of the ethic, important first thing for to put on the table. So in terms of the ethical codes, actually within CAFOD we've developed our own ethical code in response to this, and it talks into the way that this is done rather primarily. So some of the stuff that I mentioned earlier around the processes for recruitment and working with national NGOs. And then I think the second part of your question, or was that yours, Angela, was how can national NGOs hold their partners to account on some of these commitments? And I think somebody raised the issue that firstly there's the whole thing of how national NGOs work together and represent their interests and coordinate with the international community in a country context. And I think there are some real challenges there which are trying to be addressed through some of these responses taking forward WHS commitments. So, for example, OCHA is doing some work on looking at how they can make coordination mechanisms bottom up rather than top down. And there was a conference a couple of weeks ago on the localization work stream of the Grand Bargain coming out of that at Wilton Park. The outcomes of that are available on the web, and we can put the link into the into this webinar at the end. But one of the things that was discussed at quite some length there was the need to support national NGO coordination mechanisms and forums. So, I think, for example, in Philippines, there are some very strong examples of that. In other countries, perhaps less so, but there is actually quite a lot going on. And, it's very clear that needs that needs support, both in terms of financial support to enable national coordination mechanisms actually to sort of to develop and grow. Have I addressed all the issues you asked? I think there was one other thing. In terms of holding INGO partners to account, I think that this is a really difficult issue, and that also speaks to the way international NGOs approach partnership and what their partnership policies and frameworks are. And obviously, if you're a national organisation receiving money from an INGO, just as for INGOs receiving money from a donor or a UN agency, there's an innate, how should we say it, power imbalance there, which is around money. But I think there are ways that those issues can be raised in the dialogue, and particularly national organisations can ask and discuss some of those things when they're developing the partnership agreements and the project proposals. So I think I'll leave it at that now, Kat, and if people feel I didn't answer that sufficiently, we can come back. And I'd love to hear from some other people on if there are national organisations, any experiences people have got of that. It would be great. Thanks.
Can I just, this is Jing. Can I have a quick, just a short time to address the question about limited capacity of local and national NGOs?
Yes, Jing, I was going to ask if you could come in on that particularly exactly, and responding to Inga's question, particularly talking about how the national rosters can enable a larger scale response.
Yeah. So this is actually a contentious issue in the Philippines because in the 1970s, the NGOs, local and national, have long been leading the humanitarian work here with funding support from INGO partners, indicating the existence of national and local capacity that historically played a critical role in addressing humanitarian needs. This they have accomplished either in a supporting role to the INGO, through an international response, or delivering assistance on their own through an extensive national and local NGO people's organization network. The shift from international NGOs leading the response happened only very recently, and that's in 2000. So historically, that shift needs to be studied also. But coming to the present now, 17 years since the shift to internationally led surge or emergency response, the current model of surge is scale up. And for international NGOs have been supported by donors, government aid agencies to do that. Oxfam, World Vision, CARE, you've received donor funding to be able to scale up during emergencies. Local and national NGOs have not had that benefit. And but instead of looking at limited capacity of local NGOs, you turn it around and look at this social network, this social capital. This is actually you build on. You integrate humanitarian capacity in their mandate and in their systems so that they're able to scale up, and more importantly, to scale out, because there's so many at the ground level. For instance, in the Marawi response, the crisis response in Marawi, for the first time, because we've been pushing for visibility of local CSOs in humanitarian response, for the first time, UN OCHA generated an infographic that locates where the local CSOs are responding. And they are there on the ground, doing response in the most inaccessible locations. So, instead of looking at limited capacity, why don't we look at it as a capacity that needs to be more visible and needs to be supported more.
Jean, can I just add something? It was not meant to say that there was no capacity, or it's more about the scale of the response. You understand what I mean? So I see that we are not going to, if we are not considering that donors nowadays are looking for a larger scale response, and therefore organizations that can provide a large scale response. We are missing one of the issues, I think, because if there are a number, that's in my discussion, for example, with the Dutch government, they're saying all the time, well, it's difficult for us to directly fund national organizations because there are many and they are too small. So that's an issue that I feel we have to consider, and that needs also rethinking how organizations collaborate to enable to have this larger scale response.
Yeah, can I again respond to that? This is a reason why the national CSOs are also organizing themselves and collaborating. So it's going to take a long time, but the steps are there. They know that they have to get their act together. They need to step up and they need to build their capacity. So that's happening on the ground. That much I can say.
Jean, can I just suggest before we move on to the next question, because there's another question which kind of very directly links to the Philippines roster. So there was a question from Amanda which says, thank you very much for the informative presentation. Has there been an opportunity to initiate the on-call Surge Philippines platform in recent emergencies? If so, how did it work in real time? Are there any lessons learned from this experience? Also, how are individuals identified for inclusion in the roster, and what sustainability mechanisms have been put in place for its continuation following the end of donor funding? So I'm just wondering if you could cover that now, and then I think maybe we move on to some of the questions raised by Iftika and others, more kind of linked to the HR alignment.
So, so many questions on the call now. So we've activated it during the NOC 10 response in December, and we were able to deploy staff to the start-funded emergency response. We also activated it in Marawi, and it's an ongoing crisis, so we are still looking at the numbers. We also did a simulation, and there was good participation of the international and local NGOs. We've just finished the platform, the design this year, 2017. So it really needs to be activated more often, or we have to do more simulations. In terms of membership, the MOU is with Christian Aid as the roster administrator of On Call, but that's on behalf of the steering committee, which is composed of 9 members of the members of On Call. There was a question about how do we vet members of the roster. So it's not an open roster. The roster members are nominated by the organizations that we have memorandum of understanding with. That means Oxfam has put in quite a number of ex-Oxfam staff that were, that they employed during the previous responses. CARE would have contributed also a plan, as well as local NGOs. So it's not an open roster. It's the members are. The minimum vetting is that they are nominated by their previous organizations, which are members of On Call. Because we couldn't do the more complicated vetting system in terms of qualifications. That's how we approach it. Did I answer some other questions?
Thank you very much, Jing, for that response. If there's no follow-up on that on the on-call, I was going to move over to a question kind of Iftika raised in terms of donors, and there's been a couple of follow-up questions, I think, on the messenger relating to that same topic. So just for those of you who have many questions on the messenger board, so just to recap, so Iftika, who I know is leading the part of the lead agency for the project in Pakistan, had said, I think we're not talking about the real reasons behind the issue. The core question is why local NGOs are unable to offer the matching salary and career progression. Why NGOs and donors design projects in a way that keep small share of resources for HR. So without resources, how can local NGOs attract staff and keep it? Then there was an interesting response from Carol saying, I agree with Iftika and Angela. She's saying, I think it's more of a structural, political and systemic issue. Wouldn't it be better to have more rules around donor-funded INGO projects, e.g. that they must walk alongside local NGOs and aim to build their capacity long after the emergency is over? And then there was some follow-up kind of reflections on that. So there was a point on a new standard for INGOs engaged in humanitarian code, not focused on technical matters, but HR. Imagine a world where we all agreed a standard salary for humanitarian work, something akin to international labour law. The moment we even the playing field, there would be much less poaching, wouldn't there? But how unrealistic is that? And then a question about maybe linking salary growth with competencies and standardisation. So any reflections on that, Anne or Jing or anybody else in the group?
Yeah, it's Anne here. Maybe I'll just pick up on a couple of questions, but I don't know if Ben Emmons is on the call, if he might want to also speak to this. So Ben, as many of you will know, is a bit of an HR guru in the sector, and he was the person who wrote the Time for HR to Step Up, so the translating some of this into the HR implications. And what Ben had, Ben, do you want to address that question on the sort of ethical recruitment? Are you online? Maybe, okay, yes. Maybe.
Sorry, yes, just unmuting. Good morning, good afternoon all. Yeah, a few thoughts on that, on the issue of ethical recruitment. I mean, I think we've spoken to a number of those points. We're not, in the research, we're not at all suggesting that an individual's desire to pursue their own career ambition should be inhibited. We recognise that that's fundamentally important to each of us. What we focused on was the ethics of underhand selecting, not allowing staff to work out their notice periods, not undertaking proper due diligence around reference checking, and so on. On the competencies issue, I think that's come up. The CHS Alliance is revising the core humanitarian competencies framework. In fact, that process is just being finalised now, and that presents a core set of competencies which, for those of you that undertake, or whose organisations undertake salary benchmarking, you know, there are opportunities to create some more consistency, to be more competitive in the salaries that are offered and the benefits that are offered, and to be clearer about the overall proposition that an organisation makes to individuals. Because what we do know from the research and research over the years is that individuals make choices about who they work for, and many locally hired colleagues would prefer to stay in their home country. They see their career progressing there, for perhaps because they have family, or for other reasons that they want to stay locally. So we do need to pay attention. What we found in the research was needing to pay attention to the steps that we can take in each of our organisations to engage staff, to listen to their concerns, and to provide them with fulfilling work, and to provide them opportunities to express themselves. And I think, you know, Anne, you touched on the push and the pull factors. There are clearly pull factors. An international system offers a huge draw in terms of salary and health insurance benefits particularly, but there are many push factors that could be addressed by organisations. So the quality of management, the opportunities for variety in work, and so forth. And the Time to Step Up paper highlights some of those, and there are certainly on the CHS Alliance website, there are other research papers that look at ways of motivating and engaging staff. We stop there.
Thanks, Ben. And just to add that one of the things I think that you had also proposed is this idea of a sort of ethical recruitment standard, if you like, a sort of kite mark for
Yes,
agencies.
indeed, and we discussed that at a meeting with some remote participants present in London earlier this year, and that's an issue that's undergoing some consideration. There's clearly a plethora of codes that exist for us in the humanitarian sector, but we felt that there was scope to be more ethical in recruitment practice, and to be very clear, we're talking about poaching, actively going out and headhunting a local or national NGO's most senior staff, and sometimes not just one, but several of the key staff, effectively decapitating the local or national organisation. And that's where we heard more than anecdotal stories. We found, Andy, the fellow researcher, there was evidence of organisations really being hit hard by their senior staff being lured away, as on the face of it, some great career opportunities for those individuals, but some underhand practice, when individuals being put forward to participate in cluster meetings, for example, and then being somehow lured away was the kind of language that was being used. And that's really what got us thinking that there's a more ethical way of enabling staff to take steps in furthering their career, and organisations that are committed to recruiting ethically should be recognised for doing so, and could be rewarded for doing so somehow. So that's under further discussion at the moment.
That's great. Can I just address one question, I think, from Frederique from CARE, where she asks, how widespread is this issue of poaching? Unfortunately, to be really honest, we didn't, this is a snapshot, if you like. It's not, we didn't have the time or the resources to do this really in depth. So the evidence I presented was based on a fairly small survey sample, I think, of 33 national NGOs. So, it would be great really to document and understand this more broadly. And when you ask Frederique, how much did this affect some of the agencies? I mean, the most extreme example, I think, was EcoWeb in the Philippines, in one of the previous emergency to Haiyan, lost, I think, something like 12 of their 15 trained humanitarian staff. And I think, that's at the sort of extreme end, but we haven't been able to research it over a broader context. But it was certainly something that national NGO directors, have mentioned over and again as being a real source of friction. And then secondly, to say, in terms of researching the depth of, how much this happens within agencies, we've just done the Charter for Change Progress report, and a lot of the 25 signatories that reported on their progress from first year report said that this was something they're actually trying to document within their own organisations. So hopefully next year we'll have a better picture of how much the 29 INGOs in Charter for Change, how much this is something that happens in their own country programmes, and then hopefully from there move it forward. I think that's it. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Anne and Ben, for those responses. I'm conscious of time and how quickly that went, and fantastic to see so much interaction on the messenger. I think there was some interesting follow-up questions as well in terms of donor policies changing, the government's role in terms of regulating salaries, important references to the core humanitarian competencies framework, of which Ben also referenced. I think just to say a big thanks to everyone for engaging in these discussions. In terms of the project, this is really, although we're in the final year of the project, this is really a starting point for us. So there are going to be a selection of events over this year taking forward these discussions. So if you are interested and would like to find out more, I'll put my email in the messenger bar as well in case you want to get in touch. But there are going to be events on the future for Surge held in our certainly an event in London in autumn, but also in our national hubs in Pakistan and the Philippines, and hopefully our regional base as well. But really looking at what we've learned in terms of how Surge can be more localised practically based on what we've been piloting over the last 3 years, as well as how we can make Surge more collaborative and sustainable. As Sam mentioned from the CHS Alliance, there's also events, for those of you who are HR practitioners, there's events in Helsinki and also the Asia region later this year on localisation. So we're hoping to also share learning from the project there and continue these discussions. So a big thank you from my side to Jing and to Anne for presenting, and for everybody for participating in today's discussions, and looking forward to continuing them over the coming months and years, hopefully.
Kat, this is Tim Coe here. Can I just add one final, more immediate point? I'm just looking at the list of participants here, and it looks as if this webinar has really been shared within the organisations and the networks as well. And I'm just not confident that I've captured everybody's email address. So if you would like to receive the presentation, supporting documentation, or the email address here, please go ahead and do that just to make sure that I don't miss you off any email lists that I send around.
Thanks, Tim. The line was slightly breaking for me. I don't know if it was for others, but I think you were saying that if people would like to receive the presentation or further materials, if they put their email address in the messenger bar, you'll make sure that they get the information. Is that right?
Yes, and I'll put mine there as well. So if I don't capture it, please feel free to drop me a line. Just keep going at capital.org.uk, but I'll stick that in the messenger box as well.
Super. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tim, for all of your work on the logistics as well. And I'm really looking forward to also seeing how this is taken forward within Charter for Change. And Jing, of course, what happens in the Philippines. Okay, a big thanks again, and speak to you soon in various forums.
Okay, bye everyone. Thanks so much. It's a great session.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah, thanks very much,
Bye-bye.
Kat. Thanks,
Bye.
Tim.
Thank you.